is a look at why our brains love physical buttons so much. This is based on a story that I published this morning in Debugger on Medium. So you can read the whole thing if you go to debugger.medium.com. This is just a pop-up live stream talking a little bit more about the idea behind the story and also answering any questions you have about some of the technologies I talk about. So my question in the story is, why do we love physical buttons so much? And one of my observations is that the mouse has been around for over 50 years now, but nobody seems to be able to come up with a way to replace it that actually does a good job. So we've seen Dragon naturally speaking, like voice interfaces, we've seen gesture recognition, we've seen all of these technologies that try to displace the mouse, but none of them have actually successfully managed to do that. And I wondered why that was. And my background is in tech, but also in neuroscience. So I started to delve into that from a brain perspective. But first I took a look at a couple of the products that I love that I think do physical and digital hybrid design really well. I'll get back to that in a moment. One of them is the Leica Q. This is my Leica Q camera. This is a fantastic camera, and I am a working photojournalist, so this is my sort of primary camera to walk around with. It weighs about 1.4 pounds. And if you look at the design for the Leica Q, you can see it has all of these physical buttons. So it's an awesome digital camera. It's not a film camera like some Leicas are. It's a really great digital camera. It's got a 24 megapixel sensor built into it, but it has all of these physical controls that allow me to actually do all the functions I would need to take pictures using the physical buttons. So I can have it in an automatic mode, but I've actually memorized the shutter speed dial here. So I can click through this and go to different settings without actually even having to look at it. I also have the aperture wheel here that I can control to be able to change my aperture. And so everything is broken out into this physical form. And it's actually the same design that Leica used for the first Leica camera, a 35 millimeter film camera, back in 1935. The shutter speed dial is basically the same in the same place. The shutter button is the same. The function here would have controlled the film speed settings on the original camera. Here it's a multifunction. You can use it to control ISO, so it's almost can mimic the same design there. You've got these physical buttons, and this is a really great product to use, and a really great tech product in large part because it has those physical buttons. I can click this on and off. I can feel when the physical shutter fires on the camera, and again, I can use one finger and know that I'm going through the settings here. So 1 second, 2 seconds, and I can work my way up through the settings here. So if I want to dial in, I know how many clicks I need to turn on this to go to a particular shutter speed. And if I want to go all the way up to the top of the wheel, I can do that. If I want to lock in like 1/125th, I can go ahead and do that just by knowing the increments on the wheel itself. And there it is. I can also use the aperture and do the same thing. So I know I'm going like f1.7 to 2.8, and I'm doing half stops in between, and I can end up at any point that I want to be at when I'm setting that. So physical buttons makes this product really awesome and easy for me to use as a working photojournalist. Likewise, Amazon Kindle, this is the Kindle Oasis, and it's super simple. It's got this e-ink screen, and the screen itself is actually using electricity, and there's a fluid underneath the screen, and then there's pigment in here, and it's actually using electrical current to shunt ink around on the screen underneath the glass. So it's actually using physical ink like you would get in a real book or something, and it's the same resolution as that. So it's like reading a real book. It has this leather cover on the front of it that again makes it look and feel and even smell like you're using a real book. And it's got these physical page turn buttons that I love, so you can page through there. And again, this is a product where I think they've done a really great job of combining the digital aspects of books you can download with the physical aspects of this very analog, very book-inspired interface. So people love hybrids. People love products that combine some aspect of digital with some aspect of analog. And you see this even on cell phones, even on the newest iPad, where you still have a physical home button where you can go back in a menu by pressing one button where it's always in a consistent location. I think that makes interfaces a lot easier to use versus something like an Amazon Alexa, where or using any kind of voice interface where there's not a physical feel to doing it. So I wanted to know, why are these products so compelling and easy to use and successful? And I think a big part of it comes down to neuroscience. So, understanding how we actually feel things and sense touch. In our bodies, we have four different kinds of what are called mechanoreceptors. And these are the receptors that allow us in our skin, throughout our body, not just us, actually, most mammals and a lot of animals have these mechanoreceptors, and they allow us to perceive different kinds of touch and different kinds of physical sensations. So there's receptors that detect when something impacts the skin, when there's pressure on the skin, stretching, if there's damage to the skin, to be able to detect pain. And there's lots of different ways that we're doing this mechanoreception. But there's one particular kind of mechanoreceptor that is really specialized to particular application here, and why I think a lot of these hybrid products that have an analog and digital component are so compelling. And they're called Pacinian corpuscles. So again, it's a receptor in your skin. You have a lot of them in your fingertips. And the Pacinian corpuscles are quickly overwhelmed if you smack your skin against something, if you press against it. They start signaling very quickly and they get overwhelmed very quickly. So what are they actually there for? What do they do? It turns out they're vibration detectors. So the Pacinian corpuscles in your skin are actually able to detect these incredibly sensitive vibrations, very tiny, very low frequency vibrations, and relay the data on those vibrations up to your brain. And why would you want to do that? The reason, evolutionarily, is if you pick up a tool, like a hammer or a spear, or something like we would have wielded, many, many millennia ago, Pacinian corpuscles actually respond to vibrations and to impacts that happen to that tool. So if I pick up my Kindle and I smack it on something, there's little vibrations that are traveling down this. Or if I pick up a hammer, more realistically, smack it on something, there's little vibrations that travel through it. They go into my fingers, and the Pacinian corpuscles actually pick those up. And again, they're so sensitive that if I smack my skin directly, they're overwhelmed. But if I hit this, they can actually feel those tiny vibrations, and they encode them and send them up to my brain. And the brain actually then interprets this as being part of my body, basically. It's almost like I've put mechanoreceptors into the physical object that I'm holding. And over time, if I do this enough with the same physical object, like, say I'm a construction worker and I use my hammer every day, then my brain will actually become accustomed to the exact kinds of vibrations that come out of that tool. And the brain will actually learn, the right way to use it and be able to become more adept at handling it and interpreting the vibrations that travel through it. And that's how you become, part of how you become accustomed to using a particular tool. So it's really as if your brain has projected your own body into the physical things that you hold, and especially the ones that you use frequently. So why would this happen? Why would this exist? Again, from an evolutionary standpoint, it's something that scientists now believe allowed us to use tools at a very early stage. And, obviously, if you can feel your hammer or your spear as if it's part of your body, then it's a lot easier to learn how to use it very adeptly and to have these very sort of detailed fine motor skills, contact with surfaces, that kind of thing. And that would have made us better hunters and probably been an evolutionary advantage. Today, we still use them for all kinds of tools. Again, if you pick up a hammer and swing it, you're going to use your Pacinian corpuscles to pick up the vibrations and to project that into your brain, make the hammer like it's part of your body. They're also used for reading Braille, for example. So if you put your finger on a raised Braille letter, over time, the tiny vibrations that creates on your skin, your brain is able to interpret that, and you can actually interfaces with the language centers, and it's as if you're reading a written word, even if you're not sighted. You can read Braille using those Pacinian corpuscles in your finger, and your brain will pick up those vibrations and interpret them as if, again, you're making that page part of your body. Also, if you're driving and you have your hands on the steering wheel and you feel like you can feel the road, if it's bumpy or you feel that you're starting to lose traction, a big part of that is that the vibrations from the road actually transmit up the steering column into the steering wheel and then into your fingers. And through those Pacinian corpuscles, your brain learns, and it makes the whole car almost as if it's part of your body. So as you become a more adept driver, you can probably feel the road as you drive. That helps you to drive safely. So we use these very fundamental mechanoreceptors, pacini and corpuscles in our day-to-day life, but we also use them when we interact with tech products that have a physical interface to them. And the creators of these products often put huge amounts of resources into designing the physical interfaces that we use. So the buttons that we use on our devices that feel so satisfying to click on something like the Kindle or on something like my Leica Q camera, these are all carefully studied, and a lot of companies will put huge amounts of resources into choosing the exact right button that has the right feel, and that makes it easier to interact with a product. And the example I give is on my Leica Q. When I fire the physical shutter, I can feel this tiny, tiny vibration. Because I've used it for so many pictures, I've probably taken about 500,000 photos on it, I can feel even when it locks focus. So if I push the shutter button and it correctly locks focus, I can actually feel that in my finger, and I know that that's happened. And if it doesn't lock focus properly, I can feel that it's still searching, like if I cover the lens, and then I know I might have to click it over into a manual mode and then be able to do the focus manually. So I learned to use these tech products in part because the physical feel of them, the vibrations, those are all things that are being transmitted through those Pacinian corpuscles, and then my brain has then learned to interpret to help me to use these products. And again, savvy tech designers have learned this, and they put a huge amount of resources into optimizing those, into making the physical interfaces for their products easy to use and have a distinct feel. But also, if you're using a product that doesn't have a physical interface, or it has a limited physical interface like a phone, companies put huge amounts of resources also into a field called haptics. And haptics is basically the study of the physical feel of using a virtual device. So when you type on the screen on your iPhone, for example, you'll feel these little taps generated by the phone through a little vibration generator in there. And it feels like you're hitting a physical key. And again, that makes it a lot easier to use your iPhone to type because your brain, through the Pacinian corpuscles, learns exactly how those little taps feel. And that's called haptics. It's a kind of division, I would say, of the field of ergonomics. And again, it's incredibly important. It's something you probably don't notice when you're actually using your devices, but it makes a huge impact on how you perceive them and how easily you can use them. And to the extent where companies like Apple that are creating some of these devices actually give guidance to their developers about the best kinds of haptics and the worst kinds of haptics. And really the big goal with haptics is to not confuse the user. So you can imagine, when you swing a hammer, it's always going to feel pretty much the same with that particular hammer. You're going to hit it on different surfaces, you'll be able to interpret those, but it's not going to just suddenly randomly start to vibrate. Apps are different. So if somebody has designed haptics for a particular app and they're not really optimized, they're not done very well, or they change them, the worst thing is if they change them between releases of their app, for example, you might start to learn, even without knowing it, and your brain has started to learn through those tiny vibrations that your Pacinian corpuscles are picking up, how the app works. And then when somebody switches it, it's going to feel totally alien, like you're in a completely different, app or completely different setup. Or, if you had a hammer and it just suddenly started to vibrate in a totally different way, you probably would be fairly lost as to how to use it. Or at least you would have trouble using it as deftly as you would once you've gotten used to it. So haptics are incredibly important. They're very, very important for companies like Apple, for the people designing software, designing apps, and it's something that I think makes or breaks a tech product in a lot of ways, and again in ways where we don't know why something feels so satisfying. Why does it feel good to use a Kindle and to press these page-turning buttons? Why are we willing to pay $350 for a device that has a physical screen that mimics the pages of a book and that we can hold and smell and press the buttons as if we're turning pages? My theory, as I explained in the article on Debugger, is that it comes down to this physical connection. That's a very old thing. That's literally part of our bodies and part of our brains, where humans have evolved to use tools. And because these devices, either through their physical buttons or through haptics that are hopefully well designed, engage those Pacinian corpuscles, engage the brain, they actually start to feel literally like an extension of our own bodies. And the best tech products take advantage of this. They make themselves into something that literally becomes almost like an extension of your own body over time. And your phone, as you learn to use it and you feel those vibrations and you develop familiarity with the haptics in a particular app will actually become almost connected to your brain. Your brain will learn what all of that interaction feels like, and that's something that becomes literally a part of you. And I think it also explains why some interfaces are so unsatisfying to use. For example, voice interfaces, maybe you ask your Alexa to turn the lights off or to set a timer, but you're probably not going to use a voice interface to compose an email or to do something where you really have to do a lot of interaction. I think a big part of that is that voice interfaces are so open-ended that it's very hard to know how to use them. There's no physical sort of movement and touch and kind of path through them like there is with a physical device. And so I think that makes them feel just kind of alien and a little bit difficult to wrap our minds around, literally, as people. So that's, I think, probably one of the challenges with moving beyond the sort of traditional physical interfaces. And again, that's why I think, coming back to the original point, that the mouse has persisted for 50 plus years because it engages this very human, very physical thing of moving around with a tool in your hand, clicking and moving, feeling vibrations. That's something that's very fundamental, very human. Even touching a touchscreen, especially one that has good haptics, which in fact the Kindle doesn't because it has its physical buttons, or good physical design, actually engages those same aspects of our brain that are very old in a way that using a virtual interface like Alexa or Siri just doesn't. So it's a satisfying thing, it's a human thing, and if you are a product designer or an app designer, it's an incredibly important thing to think about because haptics, again, can make the difference, whether it's the virtual ones you add to your app or the physical ones you build into your product design. They can make the difference between a product that's good, functional, useful, and one that people really engage with physically and becomes a part of their life, like your phone or your Kindle, or in my case, the Leica Q that I carry around with me everywhere. For more about this, explore it more, come to debugger.medium.com. You can also follow me on Twitter at TomSmith585 or follow me here on YouTube. If you found this useful, subscribe to the channel. We're doing more of these live deep dives into some of the stories that I publish on Debugger and some of the other content that I generate. So thank you for tuning in.